Okay, everybody, here we go. And as we get started today, in honor of the Mercury retrograde, I am playing with some new technology. For those of you who are joining me live on Facebook, I need you to tell me if you can hear me, because I'm doing something interesting where I'm sharing my screen via Facebook. And what that will let me do is it will actually let me show you the charts that I would like to show you during the Astro-Babble today. So as those of you on Facebook get on, make sure that you let me know that you can hear me, because I need that confirmation before I go forward. So basically what I've decided to do is Facebook lets me share the screen loud and clear. Perfect. Thank you so much. We are good to go. So let me show y'all what I've done. So here's the deal. I've been playing with different softwares, and now I've figured out how I can put my face and the chart on the screen at the same time. So now y'all get to see exactly what I see during these live streams. And I'm still working on it, but I'm glad that we got this out of the way. So we're gonna pop open a fizzy water, and for those of you on Instagram, unfortunately, I can't share it, but you will be able to see the recording of this on the YouTube channel. So make sure to check that out if you're interested. Okay, and as always, if you'd like to be a part of the queue, just send in your birth date, place, and time to me via private message, and we'll get started. So let's go ahead and start with our first chart, which is John. Thank you, John, for submitting your chart. So we have a Leo rising. We can see the ascendant is in Leo, as well as Mercury and Jupiter in Leo in the first house. The Sun is in Cancer in the 12th, co-present with Venus. So when we see the ruler of the chart in the 12th, this is normally an indication that the self-esteem has been compromised, especially because the Sun rules the sense of self. To put the Sun in the 12th house of hidden enemies makes their personality their own worst enemy. The ruler of the chart is in aversion to the ascendant, and that's not necessarily a great thing. However, we do have counterbalances in the chart with John. Because Jupiter on the ascendant tends to make anything big. So in that first house, Jupiter is just blowing up all of that Leo energy on the ascendant and is counterbalancing that kind of suppressed Cancer Sun. And we do have Mercury in Leo conjunct Jupiter exactly at 13 degrees, which is really, really nice. It is separating, but it's still a conjunction by degree, so that's absolutely lovely for all things mental and communicative. John does have a little bit of a flair for the dramatic, but a flair for the dramatic is a lot easier to manage than all of this sensitivity in the chart. We do have this lovely formation between the moon in Pisces at 11 degrees, making a very, very loose trine, but a trine nonetheless, by sign to Venus in Cancer and the Sun in Cancer in the 12th house. I think having the moon in Pisces in the 8th, which is the house of death, by the way, when we look at traditional astrology, the moon in Pisces in the 8th does tell us that John has a natural psychic talent, especially with putting the Sun in a water sign in the 12th, which is a house of karmic healing. That naturally is going to make John a lot more sensitive to just stuff. However, to compound that with a moon in Pisces in the 8th being ruled by that Jupiter in Leo in the first house of self, we can see that there's quite the psychic flair in John's chart, and that's something that he will need to learn how to manage throughout the life. However, where John's chart is actually taking him is this North Node in Virgo and this Saturn in Virgo in the second house of finance. You know, John's life mission this time around is actually to pull him down into that second house of finance and start to get him to figure out what it means to be materially wealthy, what it means to own resources and time and energy and things that actually make the physical world go round, as opposed to all of this subtle stuff in his chart, where he's got this Sun in Cancer in the 12th, Moon in Pisces in the 8th, two houses that are known for being rather in between and rather in the background. So we have this really strong pull towards John being into that second house of more material resources as opposed to the comfort zone of the wateriness in the 8th and the 12th. And I think that that's where kind of the first house of personality counterbalance it. You know, with the personality early on, the chart grows as the person grows, yeah? So in earlier life, this Jupiter and Mercury combo in Leo in the first is really going to give John this massive personality that might have been even really hard to control. However, inside, John's actually the super softy with the Sun in Cancer, Moon in Pisces, and I think that that fire-water combination and that steam that's created from that fire-water combination is the excitatory force that John is really trying to ground this time around through that second house. And, you know, we all have trauma and we all have things that, you know, we wish would have gone differently in the life. However, I think one of the things that John is really trying to do is to control life via routine, via workflow, via processes that are numbers and details oriented, because that sixth house has Aquarius on it, ruled by the Saturn in Virgo in the second. We now have this really nice opportunity for John to say, hey, you know, I can work with things that I can actually see. I don't need to be angry or blow up or be dramatic over things that I'm feeling, because at the end of the day, there is this black and whiteness to the material world. You know, matter matters, and the idea of things being able to be touched and felt and held. Yeah, things that won't go away simply because you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. The numbers will be there regardless, and that's those statistics and those monetary aspects are really what John is craving to pull through in his life this time around. Because of that, I would highly suggest he work in the fields of finance, accounting. Yeah, I think that's really where his chart thrives. So real quick, I want to see if I can pop into the comments, make sure that everybody can see and hear. Yep, we're good. Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me as I try out this new format. I'm very excited to try this splicing of technology. Okay, so our second chart of the morning is going to be Remy. So Remy was born at 12:36 a.m. in Lagos. Let's take a peek at Remy's chart. So Remy has this really nice 1-degree Leo ascendant, being ruled by this new moon in Scorpio in the 4th. And I say ruled by the new moon, technically ruled by the sun, but there is a new moon. When the moon conjoins the sun, that's the new moon. Where the moon opposes the sun is the full moon. If you'd like to know more about that, you know, I'm teaching a full moon digital class on Monday, on the moon's day, right after a solar eclipse. So that's super fun. But we have the sun in Scorpio in the 4th house of family, ruling that ascendant in Leo. So there's this really interesting counterbalance in Remy's chart with the fire and water as well, especially because that Leo ascendant is making a very sharp square to the sun, not necessarily the moon, because the ascendant will move faster, but to the sun. So we have some ego interplay, but also some ego conflict. You know, the sense of self with the ascendant is very much about that Leo energy, that active fire principle, that idea of let me be seen and let me see. Whereas her sun in the 4th house, you know, that's a very dark and secluded sun. When we see the sun in Scorpio, naturally that solar quality is dampened by the frigidness of Scorpio, that retreating tendency, that thriving in the darkness. But also to put the sun in the midnight position in the chart, the idea of the sun being in that 4th house of family and home, you know, it is the most personal, the most touchy-feely sun that we could possibly ask for. But because of this, Remy's natural safety zone is her family and is her home. And I think that that's something that we need to definitely respect. However, there's also trickiness here, because a new moon in Scorpio I don't like to see for a couple reasons. The moon's light is hidden, yeah? And so the moon itself, which represents our emotional desires and what we need on a fundamental level, often a subconscious level, is kind of hard to tap into, yeah? Especially if you're not necessarily somebody who likes to investigate their own emotions, but to put the moon in Scorpio, a sign that is naturally about hiding and suppressing and being secretive, and to have the moon's light being completely null and void conjunct the sun in the fourth house, that hidden personal place. You know, Remy's emotions are often not viewable even to herself, and that's a very difficult space for any person to be in, really. So we really want to make sure that we're in some ways activating that Leo principle to cough up or vomit some of those feelings to make sure that they get their chance in the sun, really. So that's a nice way to think about it. And especially with therapy, like therapy would be excellent, getting somebody to have a secondary point of view. And I think that this is where the Mercury and Scorpio ruling the 11th house of friendships kicks in. The idea of having multiple friends as family who can really kind of check you when you need to be checked, who can really kind of bring some of your deeper Scorpio tendencies to the surface and expose them so that they don't fester in the darkness. But also fourth house of family, having Mercury and Scorpio, you know, this is an environment that you grew up in, that was filled with secrets. When I see Mercury, the planet of the mind, in Scorpio in the fourth, I often think of being raised by ninjas, being raised by assassins. That idea of, you know, people might seem normal on the surface, but the secrets run deep, and they run very, very deep, especially with, you know, the sun and the moon and Scorpio here as well. The idea of secrets in the family being a prominent theme that will need to be investigated in the chart, especially because you've put this Mars and Taurus retrograde in the 10th, ruling the 9th and the 4th. The idea of you exposing family secrets is actually a really big thing. I would also highly encourage you to investigate ancestral medicine and ancestral magic, and really making sure that you are able to honor those that came before you in a way that is not just public, but also unearthing is a good way to think about it. We do have Aquarius on the 7th with Jupiter here in Aquarius. Jupiter is ruling the fifth house of sexuality and children, as well as where is Pisces in the chart? Where's my girl Pisces? In the 8th. Okay, so this is really interesting. So when we have Jupiter in the 7th house ruling the 8th as well as the 5th, there's a connection to both children as well as death, and this is the lower expression of that planetary placement, especially because Neptune and Sag is here as well, really kind of mucking things up and making things a little bit more ambiguous. I think that can be a really fun placement when it comes to, you know, having a spouse or having a partner who's very sexually adventurous, but then also on the negative side, having that 8th and 5th house association, the idea of potential premature death of children, or a child is also a possibility with that rulership. Having Venus and Sag in the 5th, I really enjoy that creative energy, as well as Neptune and Sag. I think that it's well regulated with a Jupiter in Aquarius. The relationships that you get naturally kind of take on this muse-like quality and really allow you to open up the potential of what you could be and who they are through the relationship. It's a very creatively stimulating relationship that you choose to be a part of, and I think that that's absolutely lovely. But ultimately, you know, you are here to learn the hard work side of the equation. This North Node in Capricorn in the 6th house of work, being ruled by Saturn in Cancer retrograde in the 12th. The idea of therapy, working in the medical profession, and helping people through trauma is a big calling. But especially, you know, that Saturn in Cancer retrograde in the 12th conjunct the South Node, I think that you would be very excellent as a therapist, but especially somebody who investigates family trauma, because this is something, you know, Cancer, that sign of the mother, and also that sign of the family, you know, the moon in Scorpio ruling that Saturn in Cancer in the 12th as well, the idea of you working through your family stuff so you can then help other people work through their family stuff is the call of your chart, for sure. Excellent. Yay. So thank you, Remy, for joining us this morning via your chart. Good morning, everybody who's jumping on. We are on to chart number 3. So let's talk about Matthew. Matthew, darling, your chart is up in the queue. Okay. Okay. A 0 degrees Aries ascendant makes my little astrologer heart just kind of skip a beat. Not a fan of a 0 degree anything in the chart. So we need to make sure that that birth time is exact. And there's a couple things that I'm about to say that will very much clarify whether or not I'm on the right track with the reading, because that ascendant is either in Pisces or in Aries. If the ascendant is in Aries, there is some massive difficulties, Matthew, that we need to talk about. Remy, I see you just jumped on. I just finished your chart, so we're going to have to wait for the recording on that. So when we look at the Matthew's chart specifically, we can see this Aries ascendant at 0 degrees being ruled by Mars in Pisces, conjoined Saturn in Pisces in the 12th. This is exceedingly difficult. And if there was... And the sun is here too. Like, I'm not a fan of this formation because it's taken the ruler of the chart as well as the sun, and creates this darkness in the life. Saturn and Mars are both known as the malefic planets, and to have Mars, that planet of aggression, and Saturn, that planet of restriction, tied so close together in the 12th house of hidden enemies, with Mars ruling the chart, this is a difficult placement, and it will often make that Aries ascendant very aggressive, very misaligned, lashing out, potentially the idea of not just later on working in the prison system, but also potentially having issues with the law or law enforcement, or 12th house is the house of radical therapy, so it's the idea of needing to kind of cloister yourself away at some point in the life in order to work through some of this stuff. I would highly suggest working with a professional to unpack some of these deeper, darker themes in the chart, Matthew. I think that that's really important, but that is all based on the 0 degrees Aries ascendant. If the ascendant has shifted, then that's not going to necessarily be as true. We do have Venus in Aries and the moon in Aries, and this is really, a sign that you have a chip on your shoulder. Like, you came in here with something to prove, and not just something to prove, but you to prove. The moon in Aries is a very leadership-oriented placement in the first house. It's somebody who emotionally identifies as somebody who is that driving force. And also Venus here, she's in her fall. She doesn't like to be in Aries, but it's that idea of, prove it to me. Venus says in Aries, and the idea that you need to prove yourself constantly. And I think that part of that is because you feel so attacked, not just by yourself, but also by the world, with this Saturn-Mars combination kind of ruling over the chart. It's tricky, Matthew, so I think that we need to delve into some of those topics and really make sure that you're doing okay throughout the life, because you've got a seriously quick mind. This Mercury in Aquarius in the 11th house of friendships and tribes, you have this almost telepathic connection when you get into a group of people who like and trust. Like your Aquarius antenna sort of pop up, and you're able to really just gauge the crowd. What's interesting about this is I really think you'd do very good working with large social groups. You'd work very well in politics. You'd do very well with crowd control in general. You'd also be a very good public speaker, because this Mercury is ruling both the 6th house of work in Virgo and the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication from the 11th house of friendships. This is something that I like to see in somebody who has a message to share and can share it eloquently. Now, if we are able to check your emotions at the door, if we're able to bolster your ego so that you have the self-confidence in order to do these things, I think this will actually be a major calling in your chart, especially because we have the North Node at 25 degrees in Scorpio. Like, you're here to discover this business world of entrepreneurship. But it will require that you unpack your own secrets. It will require that you delve into that 12th house unapologetically and start working on your shit. It really does require that you recognize your strengths when it comes to the masses, but when you're dealing with people one-on-one, it gets very, very frustrating. Like the challenge of authority figures has always been something that you've struggled with, because this Mars, which is that martial planet, that god of war in your chart, is afflicted, and it's conjoined Saturn, which is all about, you know, being wise beyond one's years, but not being able to express it appropriately because it's in Pisces and it's in the 12th house, two places that Saturn doesn't necessarily thrive very well. And the Sun in Pisces also adding an extra dash of sensitivity. I think that all of this is really compiled in your chart to remind you that in a very potent way that you are here to do some very, very deep work. But once you get that deep work underneath your belt, there's a dramatic shift in your chart that will likely occur after 30, after that Saturn matures, and we start to unlock this 3rd house, 6th house, 11th house via your Mercury placement, and you're able to kind of Pied Piper your way into the world because you understand the underbelly of it. You understand how you've been at your worst, and therefore you can help people at your best. Help people get to their best, rather. So that's Matthew. That's Matthew in a nutshell. Let's take a peek. Okay, we are still going live. Everything's looking good. Let's continue down our chart line to chart number 4, which is Brianna. Okay. So Brianna was born 8:20 p.m. in Adelaide. Side note, if you've never been to Adelaide, absolutely lovely. One of my teaching tours took me there, and I was staying on O'Connell Street or O'Connell Avenue, and there is this 24-hour bakery that was the absolute bane of my existence, because you walk in and it's just fresh pastries, both savory and sweet, all the time. That strip on O'Connell, just so many amazing restaurants. Best food I've ever had, I've had in Adelaide, and I absolutely loved it. So check out Adelaide. Anyway, so Brianna, my dear, we have a Taurus ascendant with Venus and Sag in the 8th ruling the chart. That's really interesting. Moon in Sagittarius as well. Sun in Scorpio, Mercury Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio in the 8th. South Node Leo, North Node Aquarius in the 10th. Ruled by that Saturn in Capricorn. Yeah, we can see the education component in the chart for sure. But there is conflict. There's this idea of being unsettled, especially in the work life. Yeah, so this is an interesting dynamic for you to have specifically, Brianna. You know, your Taurus ascendant really does give you this level-headedness. Unfortunately, it's ruled by Venus and Sag, and you have this Moon in Sag in the 8th, which really does give you that kind of spunky to counterbalance the grounded. And, you know, then we have the secretive Scorpio on top of it. So when you think of yourself as a Scorpio, Brianna, I would highly encourage you to not just think of yourself as a Scorpio, but you have these 3 facets to your personality. You know, this grounded, stubborn Taurus, this really high energy Sag, and then this this kind of secretive Scorpio. And they're all kind of vying for the spotlight. But this restlessness in your chart, Brianna, I think is what we really need to address and talk about, because you have this Venus and Sag ruling your Mars in Libra in the 6th house of work, and this is something that I see a lot when it comes to, you know, the 8th house is a house of business, and your chart ruler is here, and you're really good at this idea of other people's money, taxes, estates, entrepreneurship. However, when it comes to you working for other people in the 6th house and investigating that space, we really have this this catch-22, because Mars doesn't like to be in Libra. Mars would rather be in his opposite sign of Aries, and is in fact ruling the 12th house of hidden enemies. So when you find yourself in a job, like a day job or a desk job, there's this really terrible, indecisive restlessness that kind of comes about you, and it feels like bugs crawling on your skin. Like it's not where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be where your chart ruler is, in the 8th house of business and entrepreneurship, and also in the death field, you know. But working with estates and working with things that are a little bit more entrepreneurial, I think is where your chart definitely shines from that perspective. Having the North Node in Aquarius ruled by this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the 9th, I think higher education is something that you'll need throughout the life. It will definitely not be easy, but it will be something that you'll need to kind of unlock the success principle in your chart for sure. And I'm kind of avoiding, honestly, talking about the 7th house Scorpio pileup. But I guess we need to dive into that sooner rather than later. So we have Pluto in Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, all in the 7th house of relationships, ruled by this Mars in Libra in the 7th. So when we see the ruler of the 7th in the 6th, this is somebody who will naturally go into business with their spouse. But this is also somebody who tends to be attracted to a spouse who is rather secretive, who embodies this Scorpio energy. You are yourself a Scorpio, and so you're ideally looking for somebody with those Scorpio traits as well, who can understand that deeper, darker, more underworldy side that you often have to keep hidden and out of view. Now, an interesting part of your chart is you have the Sun in Scorpio that's combusting Mercury and Pluto, because they're both within 7 degrees of the Sun, and so Pluto and Mercury cannot be seen as well, and often, there's this impulse, Brianna, to hide and to be hidden and to really lurk in the shadows and to not let yourself be seen. And I think that a lot of that stems from the idea that you think that being peppy and positive and embodying this Sagittarius moon and this Venus in Sagittarius in the 8th is really you being the cheerleader archetype, when you're really this blend of Sagittarius and Scorpio. You're really this blend of light and dark. You can't be all positive, all peppy all the time. And I think that this is what the 9th house, 10th house is really trying to teach you in your life, is that there is a balance. Like, there is no good or evil, Brianna. There just is. You have the need to recluse, you have the need to hide, you have the need to stay secretive, and you need a spouse who's going to respect that, who's going to understand that. But then you also have this need to be extroverted, and you have this need to be expressive, and you have this need to kind of act out on your own and do your own thing. And that's also something that your chart really speaks to very heavily with your entrepreneurship placements, but also your North Node in the 10th house in Aquarius. And I think that education is really the key to unlocking some of your more powerful placements as you start to unpack your life and you start to realize, well, how can I make the biggest impact on society? A lot of that is going to be learning skills, specifically from that 9th house of higher learning, travel, foreigners, spirituality. I think it would be very helpful for you to take a trip abroad. I know it would be very scary, but it would be something that I think you would enjoy very heavily, and something that would enrich your life in the way that it needs to be enriched. This Jupiter in Cancer retrograde in the 3rd, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. He loves to be in Cancer. But there is conflict in the chart because it's naturally opposing, this Neptune-Saturn in the 9th. And I think one of the things that you might run into is this idea of small fish in a big pond, or rather flip that, big fish in a small pond syndrome. The world is calling you to be more than you actually think you are. And if you stay put and if you stay comfortable in the 3rd house of your neighborhoods, your local teachers, and you don't dive into other worldviews via that 9th house of travel, I think that you'd be doing yourself a great disservice. In fact, I think that you would meet a partner abroad. I think that it would be very possible for you to also have a spouse who loves to travel. I think that would be an excellent way for you to open up your horizons and get some of that culture that your chart really craves, because all throughout the world they have to balance, their dark and their light, and for you to get better experiences with that firsthand instead of learning in textbooks. I think that's the real goal. Excellent. Cool. Good morning. Yes, I found a way how to show the charts. I'm so excited. It just took Mercury retrograde to do it. Which I always find really funny. You know, Mercury retrograde gets a bad rap, y'all. And I really thought it was absolutely hilarious that on the day that Mercury stationed, I was YouTubing how to do screen share and how to look through screen share softwares, and I'd found really complicated softwares, and it really wasn't fun, and it was cumbersome, and I didn't like it. But then the day that Mercury stationed, I found how to hack the screen share, which is using Facebook screen share, but then putting a Zoom window up so that you can still see my face and you can see the charts at the same time, so it doesn't have to be one or the other. And that's on how Mercury retrograde is helpful. So yay. And unfortunately for those of you on Instagram, I have not figured out how to do it on Instagram, but you'll be able to see it in the YouTube video, the charts that I'm pulling up. So that's what makes the channel a little bit more important. We are halfway through the lineup, so if you would like your chart featured, or you have friends or family that would like to be on the live stream, just private message me their birth dates, places, and times, always with their consent, and we will add them to the list. Or if you would like to schedule a private consult with me, you can just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Okay, so Jamie, we have a Cancer ascendant per your request at 8:30 a.m., and then Uranus in Cancer in the first house. You know, this is really interesting. Cancer is normally this sign that is very mothering and very nurturing, but I think that this goes to speak to your moon in Aries and this Uranus in Cancer. There's this unpredictability to your chart. There's this combustion element to your chart that I think is really interesting and strong, and you love in a very unconventional way. And there's this, you know, there is the Cancer side of you, there is this empathic side of you being ruled by your moon in Aries, but it's often, you know, it's that meme or that gif of "get in the car, loser, we're going somewhere." You know, you are quick to make connection, but you're also quick to push the boundaries of that connection through that leadership quality of the moon in Aries. Also, you're addicted to this idea of fame and success. Whenever we have the ruler of the chart in the 10th, it's somebody who feels that it is their personal mission, also because of your North Node being here, to be in the spotlight, to be seen, to be well known, and the brush with fame is definitely one of the life lessons of your chart. You being more vocal as well is something that's being called for in the chart. But we do have Venus and Aries here. You know, it is a prove it to me attitude that you've chosen to adopt when it comes to the spotlight, so you simultaneously are very difficult on yourself assuming that role, and it is not easy for you, but it is ideal, especially with this Mars in Virgo and Saturn in Virgo in the 3rd. You know, slow to speak up, but when you do, you actually have some very valuable things to say, and I would highly encourage you to investigate writing, teaching, speaking, as the Lord of your chart is in the 10th, and as your North Node is in the 10th as well. Being in the public eye is something that you're going to need to get used to. Sorry about it. And another reason why that's important is because we do have this Sun in Taurus and this Mercury in Taurus, although Mercury is retrograde in Taurus in the 11th house. You know, a Mercury in Taurus retrograde is somebody who's very mentally stubborn, somebody who does not like to change their mental state, somebody who really gets fixated on a particular mental way of being, and you've chosen to highlight that in your chart, that mental sense of stubbornness, by attaching it and backlighting it with your Sun in Taurus in the 11th. But I think that also makes you really good with people, because you know how to speak to a particular demographic. Your story does not change. Yeah, and especially with that Mercury ruling your 3rd house of communication, and making a trine to this Mars, which is ruling your 10th. Like, there's all of this backdrop that you're creating, this stage that you're creating to really be more vocal, more out in front of people, to be a little bit more famous than I think you give yourself credit for. You know, listen to those impulses of needing to be heard, needing to be seen, needing the attention, because it's not just you needing attention, it's actually you trying to carve your way for finding your voice. We do have this absolutely lovely, this sterling Jupiter in Pisces up in the 9th, which I think is great. Jupiter loves to be in the ninth. Jupiter also loves to be in Pisces, his home sign. So the idea of studying, travel, foreign culture, spirituality, always going to be something that kind of resets you and is a strength, a power point in your chart that I think you should take advantage of. If you feel stuck, if you feel like work isn't going the way that you'd like it to be going, I think that you can really lean into this ninth house and take a class. Learn something, develop a new skill, study a new culture, travel, shake off the rust, and really investigate some of these ninth house themes with Jupiter in Pisces present, because that's the most well-placed planet in your chart is this ninth house Pisces, Jupiter. And I think that if you're able to work with that sweet spot, you'll be able to kind of dunk yourself into that and sugarcoat any sour situations that make them a lot more palatable. But also, as you learn how to teach, and you taking classes, and you learning about these different things, and expanding this rather restricted Mercury. We need to open your mind. We need to get you to experience and try new things, and not just think, oh, somebody's wrong because they're doing it differently than I am, and you're running into those mental walls over and over. Instead, we need to make sure that you're expanding your consciousness and awareness. And what that will do is it will teach you how to teach, and it will teach you how to speak, because you'll realize, wow, I really don't like them because XYZ, or wow, I really would have said that differently, and that will fuel and kind of put a fire underneath your butt to activate some of these more public teaching placements. For sure. Yes. I think that's really the crux of the chart. Cool. Excellent. So yes, that is chart number 5. Let's just take a look at the comments. We're still doing good. So now we're on chart number 6. Oh, where are we at time-wise? Done. We're at 36. Okay, we're doing good. Let's look at Sarah's chart. So Sarah was born 1:13 p.m. in Brandon. Let's take a peek at Sarah's chart. Okay, another 0-degree ascendant. Y'all are trying me today. You're trying me today. As an astrologer, I do not like to see a 0-degree anything. It's not your fault, darling. If you were born at 1:13, you were born at 1:13. But we can see that it's not just 0 degrees, it's 0 degrees and 6 seconds in. It's so close. It's so close to not being a Sagittarius ascendant. So if the reading that I'm about to give you does not make sense, we might need to play with an earlier birth time, because a minute or two or 5 would really, really change the chart dynamic in an interesting way. Okay. Okay. And how will we know if the chart is correct? By what I'm about to say next. So the Sagittarius ascendant is ruled by Jupiter in Capricorn retrograde, the absolute worst placement that you can have for a Jupiter in the house of finance. So Sarah, let's talk about money issues, shall we? The fact that you are absolutely obsessed with money and the fact that you can't seem to hold on to it is a difficult juxtaposition. However, constantly being given money by friends, that's fun, but it is this idea of finances being the key to a lot of your chart. Jupiter is that planet of expansion, and normally we would love him ruling the second house of finance, but because he's in this really fickle sign of Capricorn and retrograde going backwards, being ruled by Saturn, who he's making a trine to up in the 10th, money is something that really is not just a big part of your identity, but it's also a big part of what you're trying to learn how to balance here in this life, is the power, the wealth, the material possession side of the equation, and really understanding what it means to move resources around. There are multiple aspects of your chart that talk about maturation as a major factor. So having Pluto in the first house of self and having your chart ruler governed by Saturn. You know, both of those really talk about how your life gets much, much easier and much more better over time. It is something that you will need to learn how to investigate, learn how to just let time heal the wound, and let experience heal the wound, more importantly. I think that with your placement specifically, you know, book learning will be very important, but so will mentorship. And the idea of finding a local mentor to kind of coach you through the financial aspects of life, but also the other things that we're about to talk about in your chart, having that person behind you who's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, who can kind of groom you to be your best and make sure that you're not falling into these really obvious traps that you've set for yourself, but that's not going to stop you from falling into them unless you have somebody to kind of grab you by the collar and pull you out. So mentorship is something that I would highly recommend for you. And it doesn't need to be an in-person mentor. It can be a virtual mentor, somebody who you follow, books that you read, etc., etc. In the 6th house of work, we have the ruler of Venus and Libra, which is absolutely flawless. You're excellent in group work. Absolutely excellent. I would also highly encourage you to investigate philanthropy, social group work, working for charities, as well as potentially delving into a little bit of politics. Having the ruler of the 6th up in the 11th means that working with friends, working for friends, working for tribes, communities, and the larger social groups at a whole. You'd be excellent at social media development. You really would, especially with this Mercury in Libra, very close to the Venus in Libra being ruled by her. The moon is here as well. So I think the 11th house is where a lot of your strength is. The 11th house of friendships, social groups, as well as tribes, is really a place in your chart that makes massive amounts of sense to you, as opposed to the nonsense that the 2nd house of wealth and finance tends to bring. I do very much enjoy what you've done with this Sun in Virgo conjoined Saturn in Virgo up in the 10th house of success. I like that placement. I think that it's beautiful. I think that it's stunning, and I think that it will be polished over time as you hit your first Saturn return around 28 to 30. And as you start to realize how good you are at organization, how good you are with herding cats. Like, you're the cat herder. You're the cat whisperer, honey. That's who you are as a person. You know, when everything is going to hell in a handbasket, and when chaos seems inevitable, and when the darkness is taking over and closing in, you as a person are uniquely qualified to step in and balance those groups with all of this lovely Venusian activity in your 11th, ruling your 6th house of work, but then also Mercury in Libra ruling all of this lovely Virgo-ness in your 10th house of career success. I think that's really great. And then you pulling it back down into the North Node in Aquarius in the 3rd, and you becoming a mentor yourself. You being mentored, especially in the financial field, but then also through your personal success, reaching out. You know, if for any reason you feel like you are off track in your life, I would volunteer specifically with like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I would teach money to a class, even if you're not good with it yourself. One of the best ways to learn is to teach. I would walk into a high school, or I would walk into a women's shelter, or I would walk into a halfway house and teach people how to balance their checkbook and work with money, and principles of saving and that kind of stuff. I think that you would really find a lot of soul fulfillment and soul growth with you taking the knowledge that you've acquired through mentorship and then weaving it back into some way that you can be philanthropic or extra giving, because again, all of this Libra stuff in the 11th, like, you have such a bleeding heart for social justice, and the idea of large groups fighting for their rights and you being a part of that dynamic is very, very important to you. But we need to make sure that you are also physically taken care of, and that you're not just living off of a diet of ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. This financial stuff needs to be pulled out of the mud, Sarah, and we need to just make sure that you as a person honor wealth. And one way that we could work on that just one-on-one is Jupiter altar, Jupiter remediation. So that could be a theme that we could talk about one-on-one should you desire. Okay. So we have 2 more charts left, and we are good. We're doing good with time. So Jay Craigs from Instagram is up next. And let's take a peek at this lovely chart, 1:20 p.m. in Renton. Okay. So we have another chart, Scorpio ascendant, woo! But that Scorpio ascendant is being ruled by Mars and Leo up in the 10th. Having the chart ruler up in the 10th house means that there is an addiction to the spotlight. There's a sense of identity that comes when this person is in front of large groups and crowds, and that they're attached to this idea of success, almost overly so. They're constantly trying to climb their own personal mountain. Achievement is something that they are always working towards, and they almost never stop, especially with this Mars in Leo ruling the 6th house in Aries. The idea of being a workaholic by nature is something that this chart speaks to rather unkindly, because there's just so much of that heat in the 10th house and the 6th house, your working houses. Not necessarily a fan of how hard you work and how little pleasure you take in life, my dear. I think we need to slow down just a tad. And how will we do that, you ask? How will we do that? Well, part of it is hanging out with more friends. I think that the sun in Virgo and the North Node in Virgo in the 11th really do help with that, especially because they are making a trine to retrograde Saturn at 3 degrees. I think surrounding yourself with relationships that are intentionally meant to slow you down is one of the strategies. So, as an example, my chart ruler, so I have Scorpio ascendant as well, and then my chart ruler is Mars in the 6th. So you've put your Mars in the 10th in Leo, and I put mine in the 6th. So I am also that workaholic. I get it. You know, one of the things that we have in common is when we feel like we're not being productive, we feel like the world is falling apart. And I get that. I really, really get that. I get that so much. You don't understand. However, I specifically schedule dinner meetings, dates with friends, Zoom calls, in order to stop myself from booking clients, in order to stop myself from being productive. I will intentionally go out and buy video games to distract me and block in times where I am playing mindless video games into my schedule to make sure that I don't spontaneously combust from the fire of my own efforts. That's a strategy I think that you should adopt as well. And specifically from the relationship department, I think that, you know, you're also attracted to fame in a partner, and having somebody who knows how to balance that fame, knows how to balance that overactivity a little bit more than you. You know, having Venus ruling your 7th from the 10th is that indicator that a spouse will be famous or very well known, but you also having Saturn in Taurus retrograde, one of the most grounded Saturns that we could possibly manifest in a chart, in your 7th house of relationships, the spouse that you choose will be very routine, very ritual, almost exceedingly boring and or normal. And I think that you enjoy that, especially with a Scorpio ascendant. You know, it's one of the things that we specifically don't like. We don't like people who are complex. Like, we read people for a living with that Scorpio ascendant. But to have somebody who is literally just normal as a spouse, as a partner, I think that that's kind of the goal. We do have a mutual reception between this Mercury-Venus conjunction and the Sun in Virgo in the 11th house of friendships. And I think that not only will surrounding yourself with friends slow you down, but what you don't understand, honey, what you don't understand is that you surrounding yourself with friends will also get you through the back door into some of these successful, higher fame-based placements that you crave so much. Versus if you were to do it alone, if you were to just stag it and not necessarily lean on other people, you wouldn't get there half as fast. Yeah? And that's the issue with this chart, is independence is not a blessing. in this chart. In fact, I think the more you lean on your friends, the more you try to acquire new social groups, and the more you try to surround yourself with the people, places, and things that inspire you, the more you're going to find success trickles into the life. And so it is this balance of, yes, there is this effort, there is this need to be seen, there is this you doing the work, yeah? But also the company that you keep is going to be one of your major keys to success. And having somebody who can pull you away from that spotlight and force you to sit down and take a breath will be important, but also the connections that you make will get you into that spotlight quicker. And that's part of the uniqueness of your chart. Also, what I don't like about your chart is this moon in Libra in the 12th, ruled by Venus and Leo in the 10th. And having the moon in the 12th, emotions are your worst enemy. Feelings are very, very difficult, but your feelings will naturally be very hurt by the spotlight. You getting notoriety, you getting fame, you getting success is actually toxic to your emotional state. It is your hidden enemy, and in fact it will start to derail you emotionally if you succumb to it. So I think that this is just a reality check and a message that you specifically understand that the reason why these friends are also so important is they are your, like in bowling, they are your rails. They are the things keeping your ball in the lane, as opposed to you free-forming it and then just ending up in the gutter because you don't have somebody to check you. And the more you catch on fire, the brighter you burn, the more you think you're going in the right direction, but surprise, surprise, you're actually killing yourself. And that's not okay. We do have a connection between this Jupiter in Pisces retrograde in the 5th and the 2nd house of finance. I think that should you choose to have children, they will be financially lucrative, especially later in life. And I know that that's a cold way to look at children as financially lucrative. But hey, if you decide to have children, they will take care of you in later age. Also, great fertility placements. I mean, South Node in Pisces isn't great for the immune system from a medical astrology standpoint, so we're going to need to watch your diet a little bit. But I mean, from just a physical perspective, the idea of your reproductive system being rather healthy and flourishing, I think that children would be rather easy. Even though they're not necessarily something you desire, like the friendships and the social connections is something that's a little bit more in line with your chart. But down the road, if you would like to invest in children, and I do think of children as an investment of time, of resources, of emotional capital, you know, it's something that I think would do very well for your chart as it matures. Okay. Good morning, good morning. Yes, yes, yes. We have one more chart to do. One more chart. And we are at Kat. Kat, my dear. So Kat was born at 8:28 p.m. in Lexington. Let's take a peek at Kat's chart. So Kat has Leo on the ascendant. This Jupiter in Leo as well on the ascendant. Oh, and a Capricorn stellium. Kat, you hit me with that one out of nowhere. Goodness, it came like a thief in the night. Okay, so the ruler of the chart is this Sun in Capricorn, boo, in the 6th house. But again, ruler of the chart in the 6th house, workaholic. Somebody who also identifies very heavily with the field of health and pets. Would not surprise me if there was scoliosis or spinal issues in this chart. Why? Because Leo is on the ascendant. Leo rules the spine, the heart, the eyes, and then the Sun is in the 6th house of health, ruled by Saturn, which is the sign ruled by Saturn in Capricorn, Capricorn being the sign of the bones, the teeth, the joints. Yeah. So having that as major health issues, especially with Jupiter being retrograde, the idea of the bones being bigger, there being extra bones, or the actual curvature of the spine being lordotic, kyphotic, overly exaggerated is a big thing in the chart. North Node in the 6th, like you're here to learn how to do a good day's work. Where's the moon? So the moon is in Libra. Hey, So the moon is in Libra in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. Being ruled by this Venus in Aquarius in the 7th house of relationships. That's fun. That's fun. So when we have the ruler Venus in the 7th, having that moon in Libra in the 3rd, there's this connection to the spouse that's chosen, Kat, being a writer, a teacher, or a speaker. Somebody who is actually very, very good with their words. You're charmed by the bard, Kat, is a good way to think about it. Somebody who's able to weave these fanciful tales and wrap you around their finger with their silver tongue. That's something that you're deathfully attracted to. Especially because you try to make everything so practical, so grounded, so numbers-based. The idea of somebody who's just in the world of fantasy completely, and somebody who has that genius mentality of the air signs really does get you a little bit hot and heavy. That is interesting. We have this 28-degree north node making a trine to Mars and Taurus up in the 10th, ruled by Venus in Aquarius in the 7th. I find this to be a fascinating placement because on one hand it does indicate that the spouse will be famous, despite you wanting to work to become famous yourself. It will not necessarily be your fame. It will be a secondary fame, often brought about by the spouse. So you actually marrying a famous writer is part of the drill, as it were. And no matter how much you choose to work, you will not be able to access the level of fame that just comes naturally to certain people. You know, your creativity is also very strong. You have this lovely Mercury in Sagittarius in the 5th house of creativity, ruling your 11th house of social groups. Jupiter in Leo is also ruling the 8th chart. I think you'd really do well in the crafting world. I think you'd do, especially with this Mercury in Sag ruling your 2nd house of finance. I think it would be excellent for you to get into a creative field, for you to work with art, for you to sell your pieces on like Etsy, and for you to make some side cash, side hustle at like farmers markets or community markets where you can kind of display some of your artistic creations. I think that would go very, very well for you. For sure. But really, you know, your chart speaks towards the need for ritual, the need for routine, the need for things to be predictable, the need for things to be on a schedule, on a budget. And I think that the more you start to understand that work over time is the goal of your chart. You know, it's one thing to sit down and spend 6 hours on a painting, but it's one thing to start with an hour and a half, have a good session, leave it, let it rest, let it cook, and then come back to it. That's the kind of work that you're here to learn, Kat. That's the kind of effort that you're here to exert. Is not necessarily the quick, the spontaneous, the rush of creativity. That's not where you're at. Instead, you're actually here to be a little bit more predictable, a little bit more concise, a little bit more slow in your creative process. But you also working with earthy mediums like rock, like clay, like minerals would also be part of that Capricorn energy for sure. Famous writer spouse. I like it. I think that's a fun choice, creative choice. Family life surrounded by death because of Pluto and Scorpio here. Lots of secrets to unpack there, Kat, which we could get into more one-on-one. And I think that's it. I think that's the message of the chart. Cool. Just famous spouse, working really hard, achievement over time. We gotta get that Leo in check, though. You know, when we say that you're a Capricorn, you do have a Capricorn stellium, makes you very, very Capricorn, but you do have this Leo side to you. You do have this Leo ascendant, Jupiter and Leo in the 1st house, which does make your personality rather grandiose. It does make you rather flamboyant, very dramatic. And it does catch people's attention very readily. So I think that combining the two, you know, your work ethic and your persona are the key to your success long term. Okay, everybody, that is it. Thank you for watching. I'm going to throw up my face so that we can screen share the face. Hello. Thank you for watching the live stream. It's been a pleasure. I hope that you've enjoyed this new technology. Again, for people on Instagram, you couldn't see it, but on Facebook, I was able to screen share the charts and show you what I was looking at as I was looking at it. So let me know what you liked about that. If you found that it was easy to watch along with that, you'll be able to see it on the YouTube replay, and I'll post a link for that in the Facebook comments as well. Yes, and if you'd like to work with me one-on-one, learn some astrology, feel free to check out my website, ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. If you'd like to be a part of the live stream, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the list. However, it is the end. I will pick up back on Monday, and in the meantime, may the stars be ever in your favor.